We're doing daily Tanya for Wednesday, the third day of Hanukkah, the 27th of Kislev, and we're up to chapter 4 in Tanya in the Chayinu on page 95. Okay, so quick summary of where we're holding. Chapter 1, we introduced that the idea of the animal soul, the human soul, which is the drive for self-preservation, preservation and self-concern, which is good. It's all our human drives, keep us alive. Chapter 2, we talked about the second soul, the second drive that we have, and that is the divine soul. The divine soul is the opposite. It's the converse of self-centeredness. It is God-centered. It only cares about being connected and part of God. Now, those are the two general drives. Chapter 3, we talked about that the integral part, the integral makeup of the soul, and we're talking now for the moment of the divine soul, is going to be the two categories of perception, awareness, seichel, and midos, emotive attributes, emotional capacity. Now we're going to talk about, and those are called, we call that the soul, although in truth you can't say the soul is even pigeonholed to a function of, awareness, of intellect and emotion, but the intellect, the intellectual awareness and the emotive attributes are very fused with the soul.
So we're talking about something called.
It's all prelude. And today
I'm reading the Hebrew here.
I'm going to segue now. I didn't start yet. I didn't even start. So we're preluding. And now we're segueing into the garments of the soul.
I'm just looking at the word itself, Rabbi.
In addition to the 10 faculties we just talked about in chapter 3.
I just want to read. I'm reading from the text, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I'm asking you a question from the text.
Yeah.
Okay. It says, Nefesh Elohit. This is a new word for me. Shlosha levushim. Nefesh Elohit. What is Nefesh Elohit?
The divine soul, which we are talking about from chapter 2, that you have a divine soul, which the drive of the divine soul is totally godly directed. Wow. In addition to every divine soul, there are 3 garments. So we said the makeup of the divine soul, at least the most internal, we call them adornments, but a good analogy would be, we'll see in a second, but the soul is, for working purposes, what is it? The soul is a divine spark. How is it most identified as awareness and emotional capacity? But there is another layer that the soul puts on called the 3 garments. And because we're talking about the divine soul, the garments are going to be holy garments. What are the holy garments? The holy garments that the soul puts on is the machshava, which is Hebrew for thought, not to be confused with the intellectual awareness. Thought would be your conscious, active thought. Intellectual awareness could be a whole repository of knowledge you have. But you don't think of everything at every moment, right? Mm-hmm. The machshava is the active thought, what you're thinking about now. So machshava, dibur is speech, umaisa and action. Those are the garments of the 613 mitzvahs. Anytime you do thought, speech, and action, 613 mitzvahs, your soul is for that time being wrapping itself or expressing itself in a garment of speech, of thought, speech, action. Let's see. For when a person actively does, he fulfills, you're actively doing in action all the mitzvahs, all the physical mitzvahs like tefillin or tzitzis. And when in speech you are occupying the person occupying himself in expounding the 613 mitzvahs and their laws. Next page, 96. And when with your power of active thought, you're comprehending all you're capable of understanding in the Pardes, which is an acronym for Pshat, P, R, Remez, D, Drush, S, Soid. Pardes is an acronym for the 4 levels of Torah understanding. Hare klolus tarig evre nafshim lebashim mitariag mitzvah satera. That all of your soul's 613 organs, many times talk about we have 248 organs, limbs or organs, and then we have 365 veins and sinews. Then that's not by mistake. You have exactly the right amount of limbs and sinews, so you can do, when you do all or any of the mitzvahs, you are activating, you're connecting all parts of yourself. So, any question? This is the general sense that when you do all the mitzvahs, any or all of the mitzvahs, what's happening is, let's say if you do all, let's say all, and we'll get back in a second. A person does all the mitzvahs.
You can't do all the mitzvahs.
Wait a second. I agree with you. 630, you do all the mitzvahs. In theory, what's happening? You have a body. The body has a capacity, has limbs and sinews and makeup, which is specifically designed by God, that every one of them will have a mitzvah corresponding to it, or a negative mitzvah not to do, that by you doing that mitzvah, it's like you're putting a spiritual garment, a divine garment, on that part of yourself. And in theory, if a person did all the mitzvahs, that means their entire being, from head to toe, and everything in between, is going to be united entirely with every possible pathway to God through the 613 mitzvahs.
Wow.
Now, as Alan mentioned, a person cannot actually do all 613. Even in temple times, one person cannot do all the mitzvahs. Very simple. You're not able to do all of them.
Takes a whole temple.
They're not even designed that you could do them. For example, there's a mitzvah of certain mitzvahs for a king. Not everybody can be a king. There's certain mitzvahs for the high priest. Not everybody can be the high priest. There's mitzvahs that are special for women. There are mitzvahs special for men. A few, some. But we're talking that's solved. That point is saying that's solved because all the Jewish people are interconnected. So when there's a high priest doing a mitzvah, he's doing it also on our behalf, and the king and so on, and men and women, for each other. So, but we're talking in theory. The point is that the human being is made up of these limbs and parts, and that's by design. And the only way we can connect, the divine soul can connect while it's in the body to God, is by doing the 613 mitzvahs, which are designed by God to connect the body and soul. The body, now we're talking the divine soul, to God in a full fashioned way.
Wow.
Now, what's interesting to note is, that's it. Any questions? Just carry on. That was more general. Now I'll go more specifics. Ubipratos, more specifically, we'll show how at least some parts are bound up with their special type of mitzvah category. Not all 613, but we'll talk about categories. Bechinas Chabad Chochma Bina Das. We said yesterday in chapter 3, talked about the three parts of the intellectual awareness, the mind. The Chochma, intuition, Bina, comprehension, Das, the personalization. Shibinavshay, that's in your soul. Milubashis Basagas Atera. They are clothed in the comprehension of the Torah. Shumasik b'pshat remesh trushsoy tfiachos asagosay shershnab shlomaylam, which he, the person, comprehends in the four levels of pardes, of the the simple meaning, the hinted meaning, the midrash meaning, the Kabbalah meaning, k'fiachos asagosay shershnab shlomaylam, which a person, to the extent of his mental capacity, and according also to the supernal root of his soul. This is a very interesting idea. The basic idea is like this. You have a brain. You have a mind. There's a special mitzvah for that. It's called Torah knowledge. When you study Torah, you're wrapping your brain, you're enclothing your brain in God's wisdom.
Like we're doing now.
What we're doing now. So you're basically enclothing your brain, your mind in God's wisdom. That's why it's called a garment. I want to just back up. I missed a point. The reason the machshava, the active thought, conscious thought, the willful thought, the thought you allow yourself to think, you choose to think of, and your speech and your action. Why are those called garments? Because when you think about it, you can put them on and you can take them off. You can choose to do this action and you can choose to do another action. So it's, in other words, the action is not as integrally part of the soul. It's something the soul does, but it is not the soul, right? The fact you can choose one of many actions at any time. Same thing with speech. You can choose to speak about this. You can put on that speech garment, or you can speak about that. So to even thought, which is the hardest to understand, even that, Judaism believes you have the ability to change your thoughts, right? You can choose to think of Chumash or Tanya or the sports or worry. Or, I mean, obviously our mind is the hardest thing to control, but you're able to put one thought in, another thought in, and change one thought for another.
Mm-hmm.
That's why these components of our personality, our willful thought, our speech or action, are actually garments. They're not integral. They're garments. And by the way, just as a side point, action and speech are more like outer garments. They're like your coat. And I would say your willful thought is like your undershirt. It's a more
like
close
part of your. It's like a resume.
Right, but it's a closer part of your. Let's say by the metaphor of garments, one's your undergarments and one's your coat, right? One is more closely connected to your essence. Now, I just want to point out this is different than we said. The soul is made up of seichel and midos. And the actual soul, if you wanted to say what is the psyche, it's the awareness and the emotional reactions to that, or the emotional capacity based on the reaction, on the perceptions. You have perceptive awareness of things, and you have emotional response. That is what the soul is. Now, the truth is, we said that's not actually the soul. The soul is a spark of God, indivisible, but it's very, very, fused with the soul. Your seichel and your midos. As an example, a good metaphor in the Steinsaltz Tanya says is that it's like the body to this, like if you have a body, your body you can't change. You can't take it on and take it off. It's fused with your soul in this lifetime, right? Your clothes you could literally take on and take off. So too the seichel and midos, which we spoke on chapter 3, which we called intellectual awareness and emotional capacity. Those are like a fused garment or a fused body with the essence of the soul. But the machshava d'ramaisa, the willful thought, speech, action, they are garments. They are putting on, putting off. Now, when you want to do divine garments, you study Torah. Your mind is perfectly, it fits like a glove. Your mind is ideas. Torah is ideas. You're putting the Torah ideas surrounding your mind. Okay, next. The other, we see the other capacity, the other component of the soul's intrinsic makeup is the midos, is the emotional attributes. Shein yira ve'ava v'anfeim to the same, which is essentially, we said, is awe, fear, whatever, awe, fear, and love, and all their offshoots, and all the ramifications, because everything is ultimately a mixture of love and fear. That's an intrinsic component of your divine soul, right? We said it's love of God and awe of God and all that. How do you put a garment for an emotion? If you have emotional capacity, how do you express that? So what do you think? So it's fast. It's a little bit somewhat not counterintuitive, but unexpected. He says in the Tanya that a physical mitzvah or a speech mitzvah, which is like learning Torah or prayer or whatever, those are the expression of your love and your awe for God, which is interesting because it doesn't seem to be as smooth. Love and awe are emotions. Those are not physical things. So how does a physical mitzvah express a subtle emotion? You know what I'm saying? Okay. So he's going to explain. You get the question, Alan, Gary?
No. I mean, I don't know what question is up there now. I mean, I understand the metaphor, but
does it make sense to you that studying divine Torah, divine wisdom, is a good expression of your mind, of your divine soul's mind?
I would hope so.
That sounds pretty good, right? Mind is intellectual, Torah is intellectual. It's a good expression of the divine soul. It's wearing a garment of the divine soul, of the mind, of the intellectual. But now we're saying emotions are expressed in action. That's a bit of a jump. Emotions are very they're not physical. Why is an action? Why is it? No.
Because it's b'chol avavcha v'chol nafshacha.
Okay. So he says like this. Love is the root of all the 248 positive commands, and from it they issue forth, and without it they have no true substance. Love is the root source of all positive mitzvahs. If you don't have love, the mitzvahs don't have true substance. I mean, they don't have, not truth, they don't have, I guess, they're not sustainable, maybe. Key. Hamakaiman be'emes, someone who fulfills positive mitzvahs in truth, like Pesach David, for example. Hu ha'oiv es Shem Hashem, v'chavis davka be'emes, is one who loves God's name and truly desires to cleave to Him.
Right.
And there's no other way to connect to God other than the 248 commands, which are called in Kabbalah the 248 organs of the king, as it were. What does it mean that a mitzvah is the organ of God, a limb of God? It means just like a limb, eye is a perfectly, it's a perfect hardware for the power of sight, the faculty of sight. So to each mitzvah is a perfect channel for a certain angle of God's divinity. And when you do them, you're bringing all the different angles of God's divinity into our world.
Wow.
Okay, let me back. I want to just explain this a little bit. If someone loves Hashem, someone ponders that God is the truth of your existence and is the power of your soul and all of that. You'd be very grateful, and you'd be very appreciative and very loving, and want to really always be connected to your true source of reality, right?
Amen.
If you love God, you want to connect to God. But how do you connect to God? I love you, God. How does a person who loves God?
Exactly. Love to me is not the love of Hollywood. The love to me is commitment.
Right, but wait. Hollywood's not even, it's on the table. They don't
Well,
get it.
that's what's been propagated over all the in all.
Yeah. Infatuation, lust, all these things. That's not love. Love, we're talking a true appreciation and desire to be connected to the person. But the thing that's not a person is God. The problem is God's not a person. So how do you, if you love God, if you do a real cheshbon hanefesh, do a real accounting of your life, you'll be very grateful to God, not just for your whole life, but even right now, your mere existence is God. So you love God. So you want to connect. How does someone connect to God? So some people connect to God. They try the best they can. What do? They say, I'm going to climb a huge mountain and watch a sunset and feel the presence of God's majesty. And that's how I'm going to connect to God. Right? That sounds good. Feel very spiritual by a beautiful sunset on a mountain. Other people will write a poem expressing their appreciation and love for God. However, the problem is that with God, a person you can write a poem to as an expression of your love to them. You can be in their presence and feel an expression of close and feel, and satisfy the need to love them. But God is not a limited person. God's not finite. Nothing you're going to do anything a finite being will do cannot make the connection to God, because a finite being cannot reach the infinite. However,
That logic is. I'm going to just say I question it, but I won't have to talk about it now.
Let's finish that. But God, who's infinite, God, not just infinite, God is infinite and finite and transcending both.
We are potentially infinite ourselves.
Listen to the point. God is infinite and finite and even transcending even those definitions. God can make the mechanism for us to connect. A finite being can only make a finite bridge. It does not lead to connect to the true infinity of God. But God, who is sending infinity, could make the bridge to connect to us and give us that bridge. And that's what the mitzvahs are. The mitzvahs are God's choosing to give us a bridge to the infinite. That's where the word mitzvah actually comes from the etymology of connection. Tzavta. Mitzvah is like tzavta, means like a group or a band. Because every mitzvah is an incredible connection that God gives to humanity to connect.
Wow.
What was the word you were using? Mitzvah?
Mitzvah comes from the root word of tzavta. I think it means like a group or a band. Tzavta. Mitzvah is commandment. Tzavta means bonding. Every mitzvah is a bonding with God. It's a connection to God.
You're sure of that definition?
Yes. That's etymology. It doesn't also mean commandment, but you see that there's in Hebrew you can have, one word could have a lot of influence from a couple of roots. But anyways, the point we're saying here is you love God. We're saying your soul's made up of awareness and love and awe. Where does the love and awe find expression? Where can it express itself? If you love God, you can only say, I'm going to do what God wants, because that's the way I connect to God. God chose how I can connect. If If you really love, you want to connect. How do you connect? Through mitzvahs. There's no other way to connect.
Amen.
This is a fascinating idea about throughout history. Artists, scientists tried to find a way to create a connection to something divine, and they did great things. You can do amazing. There are poets and brilliant scientists and and all types of creative souls, but they cannot create the bridge to the infinite. Only God, who is infinite and transcending infinity, can create the bridge from us to him, and we can then ride that bridge. We can walk that bridge.
Wow.
But anyway, the point we're saying here is, surprisingly, love and awe, that's the part of your soul, finds expression in trying to connect to God. So the love wants to connect to God. How do you connect? Through mitzvahs. So every mitzvah, physical and speech mitzvah, is going to be what? It's going to be a expression of your love for God. Now we're talking in the divine. So we'll get to the animal soul in chapter 6. We'll get back to that. And the other part of your soul, the capacity for fear or awe of the divine, that's the root of the 365 negative commandments. What does that mean? If someone has fear and awe of God, they are afraid to rebel. They don't want to rebel against the truth. They don't want to disconnect. They're afraid of disconnection. Or on a deeper level, there's a deeper type of fear or awe, that you feel ashamed before God's greatness, so that he will not rebel against the all-seeing eyes of his glory by doing what is evil in his eyes. Namely, any of the abominable things hated by God, which are the klipot and sitra achra. Meaning, if you feel in the presence of God and you're so humbled, you feel so puny compared to the truth of God, you're embarrassed to do anything that disrespects God's will, which is any sin, which we said we'll talk about later, comes from sin. We mentioned briefly that you have klipa. Klipa is God creates the equilibrium of good and bad. The bad is called klipa, it means the shell that covers the good, or the sitra achra means the forces of the other side, the stuff that's not good, that God creates in the world. And if we choose to do anything that gets, its nurture, a sin from it, that's nurtured from this klipa energy, then what happens? You're giving life to you're giving added life to the bad in the world when you do a sin. So a person who every person has a capacity for awe and fear, right? Awe and fear.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two types of awe/fear. What's awe? One awe is God is so vast and great, I feel like nothing compared to God. So like I'm not going to rebel against God's majesty, the creator of everything. That's crazy. How would you rebel? How would somebody rebel against the master of creation? On the other hand, someone who feels God is close, they could also have a certain, not just love, but also awe of embarrassment. And you're in the face of a great person, but tzaddik, you feel so, he said the Steinsaltz, quickly. Someone who has the yira taremimus, the fear of God's loftiness, is almost like more of just a person who views things objectively. God is so great. How could I tamper with his system? How could I do something against his will? Yiras boishas, the more internal fear, is an element of connection, intimacy, that your relationship, you feel connected to God. You're like, I feel so inadequate to them. God and me, I feel inadequate. So some people that feel God so great and so imminent, they feel paralyzed by inadequacy. The point is, we're saying, paralyzed is a bad word. But anyways, to finish up today, you have garments of thought, speech, and action in the divine soul that expresses either the mind of the divine soul, which is done by the garment, the expression of Torah study, because you're putting your mind into Torah ideas, and your emotional capacity, which is essentially love and awe, those find expression in the actionable or speech